We're back and welcome to the latest episode of Think Inclusion podcast. Continuing our theme of inspiring others to learn more about inclusion through storytelling, I'm so happy to share this episode with you where Matheus shares his experiences as a gay Latino male with ADHD who overcame barriers to build a global career which includes working in the space of equity, diversity and inclusion. And he's now also achieved his latest life goal. I'm sure Matheus will inspire many of you over the next 30 minutes or so, and I hope you enjoy this latest episode. Hello and welcome back to Think Inclusion podcast. My name is Garry Clarke-Strange. My pronouns are he, him, and I am your host for today's episode. Delighted to have you back with us and delighted to introduce you to my next guest in the series.
Thank you so much, Garry, and I'm really happy to be here. Really excited to have this conversation with you today.
Me too, and I've known Matheus for a couple of years. We met through networks and organizations we worked with a few years back, and we've kept talking over the years, and then we both had quite a bit of a plan for life, which involved moving countries, and we've reconnected over the last couple of months because we both achieved our plan, which I'm sure you're going to get into today, Matheus. To get us started, do you want to introduce yourself to everyone? Tell us who you are, what you do, what's your background?
So I am Matheus Carvalho. He and him are my pronouns. I am an independent consultant of leadership, talent and culture development, and also, of course, of inclusion and diversity. But before being where I am now, I've got over 10 years of experience in this field behind me, both in global multinational organizations as well as startups. And my career in this space has been predominantly split between working in the media and entertainment sector for a global company, but also working, as I said, within a startup environment, supporting other organizations, leaders, and corporations in the space as a director of VDI. And now, building on your conversation point around moving countries, I'm now based off Portugal after spending over 10 years in the UK. And I'm still supporting leaders and businesses, not just in Europe, but beyond as well. So, in case you're wondering where the accent is from, I'm originally from Brazil, come from a family of Italian and Portuguese migrants. And although I haven't really lived in Brazil for 15 years now, I cannot underestimate how much those years of my life have helped shape where I am now, because I think in the sense of working in purpose-led businesses or working in a purpose-led, let's say, career, thinking back on my days as a child in Brazil, I wasn't necessarily maybe you can relate to this, Garry. I wasn't your usual child growing up in a potentially conservative environment. I'm not sure if that was your experience as well. Unlike most Brazilian boys, I wasn't necessarily the champion of the football team. I was a much more of an introspective, nerdier type. I love my movies, still do. And I'm not doing my work. Classic Hollywood is where I recharge my batteries. And I actually ran a queer film club in London. But I think that this feeling of being a bit of an outcast and living in a predominantly conservative part of Brazil, I think that meant that I was, from a very early age, confronting stereotypes around sexuality, around masculinity, due to the fact that I did not conform to many of those. And I think that the classic queer narrative of having to go out and find your own place and find your own tribe, that's what took me on a journey of moving countries. So, which again, eventually that led to also my building a career internationally. But initially moved from Brazil to the US. I lived in Florida for a few months. I did an internship at Disney, the park, which was a great experience. But also that led to my moving to Ireland, where I was doing my MBA, but there I started also working for Disney. I was very fortunate to have that experience of working at the time in a retail shop and then moving to a very different environment, which was their head office in London. So I was there supporting the learning and development team across EMEA. And that was a really fantastic experience because I really got to take a deep dive into multiculturalism and supporting leaders across Europe, but also understanding how a brand as powerful as Disney resonates across different cultures. And I mean, my first assignment in that job was doing a Star Wars project. You know, how cool is that to have on your CV? That one of the first things you do. Bringing this back to the conversation on identity, one of the really key, let's say, watershed moments for me at that moment was that. So, as a gay man working in that environment, surprisingly, I didn't always feel comfortable talking about my personal identity in the workplace. And I understand now a lot of it was also internalized, you know, an internalized fear of what impact it would have on my career.
I think that came from your childhood, Matthias. Is that part of you? Does that come from Brazil, from your background?
The idea of having open representation organizations was still, I wouldn't say it was in its infancy, but the reality was I did not necessarily see queerness being talked about openly in the workplace, or at least not in a way that is meaningful in a way that we see it now. And again, a lot of that was my making assumptions that because I did not see it, maybe I did not know what the impact would be of my taking a risk to be open about my personal identity.
I get it. I get it. And that is the theme of today, right? So we're talking about, I guess, your journey as a gay male coming from a Latino background, but then globally working in different organizations. Also, someone who identifies as a gay male, we all have a different journey, but there is commonality, I think, especially in depending on the generation we grew up in. And I always worked for organizations where it was totally okay to be gay, but I didn't always know whether I was getting treated the same by being open. Do you ever feel like you got treated differently, or were there any barriers put in place for you when you did open up about your sexuality?
I can think of yeses and no. So I think one of the watershed moments for me, you know, that was still during my years at Disney. The Pulse attack happened. So Pulse, for those listeners who do not know, Pulse was a LGBTQ plus club in Orlando, Florida, that was attacked, and there was a shootout. And again, there were actually I lost a friend in that attack. But what happened was, I remember the community globally, I mean, wherever people could, obviously, got together, and even in the UK, I remember standing on Old Compton Street with other LGBTQ plus people, observing that moment of silence. And I think that what happened then was that even internally where I was, people within Disney mobilized and started an ERG, Pride ERG, which again I wasn't one of those people, but I was part of that group, and we did accomplish great things. But to answer your question around LGBTQ plus in the workplace and what that's meant for me, I think that was the moment where I started seeing parts of my identity and my experience being openly talked about in the workplace in a way that I had never seen it before. And I went on my own personal journey of appreciating how important I was in the workplace, because I think I went into the workplace maybe with even probably internalized homophobia around my questioning, oh, do we need still to see rainbows in the workplace? Is that still relevant? Do I need a badge to label me, or connect me to my community? Haven't we gone past that without realizing that I was covering up? I was not being myself in the workplace. And I think, seeing rainbows, seeing open conversations about LGBTQ plus representation, that for me was such an important turning point in my own personal understanding of self. Now I obviously understand and I agree and I embrace the fact that yes, the rainbow is powerful. The rainbow, we need to use it, and we need to use it for good. But I think, just going back to the element in the workplace, having that ERG, which gave us a sense of community, that really for me was a freeing moment around feeling more comfortable being open about my identity and what that meant for me, not just in terms of my personal life, but I can now get into the themes of leadership, how that meant for me in terms of like a professional progression and my own brand, if you will, as an individual working organization.
It's so interesting because, again, I talk about, and the reason I was asking you that because maybe it's a generational thing, but actually it was slightly different. Where when I was younger, working in organizations where I say it was acceptable to be gay, there was no rainbow flags. Like we weren't actually talking about it as much as we do now. But yes, I felt comfortable to be openly gay, and I don't know where that kind of came from. That, but I think the world has changed to where because of things that have happened over the years, we do need to have that visibility, because there still is a fight, and there still is, regardless of whether it's any part of the LGBT community, there are areas that we are facing barriers. So I think it's important to hear that you got to the point where you needed to see that, because it helped you be more you. But there are barriers, right? We definitely face barriers.
To your point there, Gary, around seeing that rainbow, I remember one of the things that we did as part of the group was we created pins, rainbow pins that employees could wear for Pride Month. And I remember someone just joining the organization and seeing that was one of the first things that they saw was that, and how meaningful that was to any employee starting, being LGBTQ plus or not, in terms of the message that it sends. But also, speaking of the rainbow and the moment that we're living in, now that we're seeing this rhetoric of, remove rainbows, we're not doing this anymore. How important it is that no, the rainbow is there. It needs to be seen. I think all of us intrinsically want to fit in. We want to belong, right? And a lot of times it results in us rendering the characteristics that makes us invisible, because you don't want to stand out.
Sometimes we don't even know we're doing it, right?
I'm just thinking here about as a male gay Latino, and again, I try not to label myself too much, but I think for the purpose of this conversation, for me it was like, okay, I'm in a workplace in the UK, so that means for me, okay, be less flamboyant, be mask the way that you mask your accent or the way that you speak, or code switch. I remember once being on a call with a coworker, and then I was working from home, and the person with me was like, "Oh, what were you doing there? What?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" "Oh, I just saw that you changed your tone of voice. Your voice all of a sudden grew a bit more. You lowered the pitch of your voice." And then I realized, well, you know what? Probably that was me trying to sound a bit more quote unquote straight because I was speaking to a senior leader, and I felt I had to mask that, let's say, that the element of gender fluidity, which I mean, in a way that most LGBTQ plus people who exist within that, that spectrum of feminine and masculine. And I don't just mean about gender identity. It's about the way we communicate. It's about the way we express ourselves.
When you've got that's a barrier in itself, right? Because you are constantly thinking about, I have got to act in this way, or as you say, put a different tone of voice on just to fit in that space. And you can't be your best self when you do that. Like, we talk about innovation from having diversity, but if you are having to think about, oh, I need to act differently because of the room I'm in, you're not working. You can't possibly work at your best in that room because you're not fully there.
As you're saying that, I was thinking also about career progression and how the impact that it has on an LGBTQ plus person striving to achieve leadership positions in an organization. First of all, if we've got all these stereotypes or ideals of gender and sexuality, whatever it is, in terms of what is acceptable, okay, and I'm using those loaded terms very knowingly here, what's acceptable in the workplace. You add the layer of what is expected of a quote unquote a leader in the workplace, right? And all these outmoded ideas of the way a leader behaves, the way a leader is supposed to be assertive, or a lot of these maybe a lot of times very stereotypically masculine ideas of leadership. So as an LGBTQ plus person, you are there navigating what it means for you as an individual. And then also you're trying to aspire for those leadership roles, which also do not fit necessarily into your mode of existing, and trying to adapt and shift and contort yourself in so many ways.
And I think the result of that is we're seeing a lack of representation at senior levels from people within the LGBTQ plus community. That it's not, although we say we live in a world that's more acceptable now, actually the stats don't really yet show that we are all able to have the same opportunities to get those senior positions, right?
There's a lot there around data. I think that, obviously sexual orientation as a field is not necessarily captured, or it's not taken as seriously as data collection on, say, gender, race. But there's also the element of safety, right? People not feeling safe to disclose. But to your point there, I work with, and I have worked in and not worked for, and supporting in a consultative capacity, many sectors where LGBTQ plus employees are overrepresented in entry level roles. Or and you could think of tourism, you could think of hospitality, you can think of service, organizations in the service industry. But the higher up the ladder you go, the more seemingly, or at least on the surface, straight, and a lot of times even mayo, it becomes. And I think, having a conversation that even for me is uncomfortable to have within myself, it's around those biases of what kinds of roles a society accustomed or expecting to see LGBTQ plus people in. Are we talking only about the roles of the service providers or the entertainers or the people who are here helping to please, but not necessarily in a role that's more assertive or in a role that in which you're supposed to inspire people, lead people? And I think those are barriers that one has to break daily.
And it follows a really similar narrative to what we hear about, the gender split in leadership roles. And a lot of the organizations and industries you just mentioned are exactly that. Overrepresentation at more junior levels when you get to the more senior levels. And a lot of the time it is because there's no representation for people to aspire to be, because you will always look up to people. And I think for me, a realization I had was one of the reasons I think why necessarily I didn't make it to the levels that people might have expected me to make it off in organizations was I couldn't just do the basic narrative with some of the senior leaders. And some of that I mean by I just couldn't talk about golf and football because it wasn't part of my interest. So I'd go into a room and I'd automatically feel like an outsider because it wasn't part of the basic conversation before the meeting, and therefore you never felt like you fitted, and therefore I don't think I achieved my full potential, what I could have done in corporate world, because I don't think I ever fitted in that dominant group enough to be able to be really comfortable. And it changed over time, but that was certainly, especially in the younger parts of my career where we couldn't get into that room. The door was open, but you couldn't really go in.
When you asked about barriers, that definitely was for me one of those in which I had so many hoops to jump through, whether culturally or again being part of that conversation. On the flip side of that, I have been very privileged to also encounter people who have appreciated the fact that I am not your usual a leader in this case, in the sense that I've grown into the position of being in a leadership role. And I think the flip side of that is that this has also helped me grow, not just in this space, but for my personality and the quirks and the traits that I tried so hard to conceal because that's what I thought I had. Those are also some of the things that are my USP. But obviously, I had to grow into a space of being comfortable with that being my USP and having had to do a lot of work on myself to be a better leader for myself in order to be a better leader for others.
What you're alluding to there, because we've talked a lot about your sexuality or how you identify as part of the LGBT community, but on top of that, you also are diagnosed with ADHD. So that's, I guess, another barrier potentially to get over. So talk to us a bit more about that, Matheus.
Yes, absolutely. On the ADHD side of things, one part of my career that I didn't get to talk about too much was the fact that after the corporate experience, I joined a really great startup consultancy focused on inclusion and diversity. And one of the gifts that experience gave me was to find a community that also, like me, had also gone through many challenges in life due to being part of underrepresented, minoritized groups, and listening to colleagues talk about their experience of being neurodivergent and talking about their experiences of being whether autistic or being dyslexic or having ADHD. All of a sudden, a lot of the challenges that I experienced over the course of my life, they started making sense because I started seeing those challenges through that prism. And then I thought, oh, there's something in here that I haven't quite tapped into, or that I didn't even know, or had the, let's say, the right terms to be able to explore. So I started looking at as much as I could into neurodiversity, also due to the nature of my job, obviously, because I was in a position of advising others, but from a personal development perspective and understanding more and more about how I identified with that community and within that community. And then that led to my searching for a diagnosis, which I got, which just proved what I already knew at that point, which was yes, I do have ADHD. Also, I do have dyspraxia, which dyspraxia affects your sorry, apologies. Dyspraxia affects your motor coordination, which also explained why I was never going to be, or never felt like I could be the champion of the football team. And I felt much safer sitting in front of a TV and daydreaming, watching movies. But all of a sudden, my life made a lot more sense, and that was a gift, unto itself. So that would have been 4 or so years ago. So I remember during the pandemic, as I think so many of us discovered ourselves as neurodivergent during the pandemic because we were experiencing things that we never experienced before, including overload of emotions, of or change and being locked in. Many of us many of us who actually were lucky enough to or privileged to be able to work from home. But also that gave me more time to think and do that research that I'd never maybe taken the time to do. So I was in the UK at the time. I got diagnosed through what is called Right to Choose, which I do recommend people looking into because it speeds up the process, even though it's still via the NHS. It was a very important step for me in terms of having confirmation of what I already knew, but also once I was told, that's very interesting. Even though yes, I was like it was a relief, but there was still a time of like getting used to again having that quote unquote label, which was both empowering, but I won't lie, there are also mixed feelings about how you feel, how you fit, and we all go on this personal journey.
And it's so interesting that you say that, like, it just
Mm.
confirmed what you already knew. You knew something was there, but the diagnosis gives you the confirmation. And I guess what I hadn't really thought about it in kind of thinking about you is like, it, because we talk about, when you're in the LGBT community, like the outing yourself constantly at work. I guess it's like another layer of outing that you're constantly having to do. And maybe like now that you had the diagnosis, like, did that feel different?
I'm also talking about this from the understanding that self-diagnosis is really big within the neurodivergent community. Also, because due to the lack of, let's say, ease or the lack of ease of access to formal diagnosis. Um, so I don't discount self-diagnosis at all, but I think for me it was important also for me to have, a professional opinion. But it for me it helped me help myself and also and in the process help others. So I think for me the journey of ADHD has been one, yes, being comfortable with it, but also understanding that it is a bit of a roller coaster because it's one of those flavors, I'll call it that way, of neurodiversity that it has so many flip sides to it, in the sense that okay, well, I think the positives, and I can talk about the positive impacts that it has in my life. I think that I've always been perceived as being a very creative person. And I think that's true. And, being a very spontaneous person. And I do now understand that also has to do with, yes, there's an element of personality, but there is an element of how my brain is programmed. There is an element of the ADHD brain being able to make connections very quickly. And also, I mean, there's some scientific explanations here that I won't get into around, your brain constantly chasing dopamine, but the element of being creative, of trying to look for something new. And now I understand, yes, that is also linked to do with the element of being ADHD. And again, these are qualities that have helped me immensely over the course of my career, in the sense of bringing that freshness and spontaneity to not just personal relationships at work, but also to my performance. And also that links to dealing with situations of crisis, for example, and having to think fast and having to be quick to respond.
I follow a few different ADHD accounts on social media, and one of the things that I took away was that I watch a lot of it, and it was like that hunt for dopamine hits all the time is constant, and you're doing it, and it drives great things, but also it can be exhausting.
Absolutely. So I think, I think that's a very nice segue into the, let's say, the flip side of that, which is it's also because your, say, if your brain is running
Yeah,
100 miles per hour all the time. Imagine how tired, it can also make you. So I feel like there's the element
yeah,
of tiredness, of sensorial overload, emotional overload as well. So the way I see it, and this is a visual image that has helped me try and make sense of my brain. Sometimes I see people who can easily say, let's say, Gary, this conversation I are having, I can package this conversation into a tiny, into a nice box, and I'm going to put this in this drawer in my brain, and I'm going to close that drawer, and I will not access that drawer anymore until it's the relevant time to do
yeah.
so. For me, as in the brain of an ADHD person, at least that's how I experience my brain. It's more like, imagine a painter, and you've got all these brush strokes and all these colors and all these palettes, and you're mixing them all at the same time, and you're accessing them all at the same time. Not always at the relevant times, but they're always there. So again, that connects to that element of, yes, your brain can be very creative, make associations very quickly, but also it means that it's much harder for, at least me personally, and I know other ADHD people experience the same, to relax, to switch off your mind, to do that element sometimes of self care, where your brain is not just, your brain is just switching off and you're focusing on the right here, the right now, as opposed to, again, opening all of those drawers inside your brain at the same time. And the overwhelm can be real.
It's so funny how you talk there. The way that you describe that just shows how unique we all are, but also with the way your brain is kind of processing that. How you describe that with the paint is not how I would, when you were talking there, that's not how I was thinking of it at all. I was thinking of a completely different, that's the way that your brain works. And I appreciate it. Just knowing ADHD people, it's exhausting for them. And then I guess for you, on top of all of that, so you've got your, and please correct me if I'm saying this wrong, like your overactive brain. I don't know if that's the right terminology to use. And you're doing that as well as working in this space where you're working in the world of ED&I and leadership in general. And because I know from working in this space, I need to have downtime. I need to be able to decompress, post some particular types of work because of the space that we work in. How does that play out for you?
Yes.
Because you need that self care in life in general as someone with ADHD, and that you need that downtime. That's
Mm.
hard. Layer that with working in this space as well. What's going on? Tell me.
I think, thank you for bringing back to our role as ADI professionals, because then I think I'll try and connect the dots between this conversation, the conversation we're having earlier around being LGBTQ plus, and again, we can expand that to being part of a group, that is minoritized or historically ostracized, whatever terminology we want to use. I think there's something talking about the element of belonging. I think so many of us, a way to
Yeah.
belong is to fly under the radar. Is not to be too standoffish. Is trying not to be too under the spotlight, because that can be threatening. Because then you can be discovered. Then you can be outed. Whatever outing that may be. And I know here we're talking about sexual orientation and neurodiversity, but we can apply that to other contexts as well. So not being outed, and going back to the point of career progression, whether it's in EDI or any other career, when you're striving for a leadership role, being in a leadership role or in a position of management means that automatically you are in the spotlight. So eyes are on you, and you're expected not only to
Yeah.
perform, but obviously you'll be judged differently, you'll be evaluated differently, there'll be other expectations put upon you. And again, thinking about so many of us who have internalized this need to fit in and not to be in the spotlight, how threatening that can be. And I think, or how threatening that can feel, not necessarily be, but, and to your point there around working in the space of EDI, I think that's increased by the fact that so many of us working in this space, we're working on our own, whether, if we're part of an organization, or we may have a team that we're working with, that we're reporting to, or that's working under us. But there are not only expectations of performing as a leader, but there are also these expectations of making some real significant changes in spaces in organizations that unfortunately a lot of times is way too much for just one person. And and that's, I guess, the one of the things that me growing in the space and within developing this career, also having that understanding as I help leaders or even myself, is that understanding of not just understanding boundaries, because boundaries can be, especially again if you're really aiming to please like so many of us are, those boundaries can get really blurred, but also the understanding of a lot of us are doing the best that we can within spaces and systems that are way bigger than us, whether it's a big massive corporation or even a smaller business. So you need to look after yourself, and I think that doesn't just apply for leaders in the ADI space, but I think because we are constantly confronted by trauma, our own traumas being reenacted before our very eyes, or within the work that we do. We're constantly facing rejection because we go into these spaces where people many times don't want us to be there. They don't want to hear what we have to say, and we have to say the thing that's the unpopular opinion. A lot of these are like those triggers of all those things that we tried so hard to fight to escape from, and that's again exponentialized by the fact that we're also expected to perform as professionals, and we also have expectations of doing the right thing and all of those things that again come with the job.
Begs the question why we do it, Mateus, right? Like why? Because it is really, it is all them challenges you're saying are really, really real. But
Yes,
I guess for me, why I do it is I know I'm making a difference, and whether it's one person or whatever, we're making a difference when we do it. But it, there's a reason you do. We have our own experiences. We only know what we know ourselves, what we can bring to the table. But it does come with. I remember talking to somebody once, and they were saying it's kind of like it is like you are opening up that wound every day when you go to work. And that is, like a microaggression, it's like a paper cut, it keeps on going. And there are times where you then just have to retreat a bit
you
and go,
do, you do, and
today
you
I
can easily
just
bring that
need
home with
time.
you, probably much more so than in any other profession, right? So, and I think then to go back to your question around now, what do we do or what have I done? At least that has worked for me. I think that element of working on yourself in terms of um, self leadership, I'll put it that way, because that is about not just development as a leader, whether it's coaching or
Yep.
sport or having your allies, but also counseling, therapy, anything that works for you, because understanding, to your point, your trigger points, that helps you build your resilience, that helps you be a better leader for yourself so that you can be a better leader for others,
Yeah.
and you can better navigate the spaces in the inclusion and diversity field, which again they are very rewarding, but it can also be very stressful. As we know, it can be very emotionally demanding and very rewarding. I do not want to the side of that.
Yeah, totally. Well, there's nothing better than knowing you've made a difference in this space. If I'm kind of going back to what we talked about, the dopamine hit of knowing that you've made it, it's whether it's a training session or whatever, it's incredible feeling to know you've made a difference to people, like humans. It's why we do it. And I guess like you talked a little bit earlier on about your passion for film and your queer film group that you have in London, but talk to us a bit about where you are now. So you've created this new world for yourself. What's the vision of Mateus 2025 when we're talking? Where are you at?
I think for me right now is and okay, and this links to the conversation we were having just now around tactics and techniques to navigate this space. I think for me, it's reconnecting with my why and why I do what I do and why I love what I do, in spite of the challenging environment that we find ourselves in at the moment. And for me, I think that's not just something that for me is very important. I do think that leaders and people working in this space, to your point, we need to go back to why do we do what we do and why it's so important to us. And again, that feeling of knowing that we're making a difference, knowing that we're doing something that matters. And I think that, at least for me, that's something I'm not just clinging to, I'm keeping that close to my heart, that understanding of why I do what I do and why it's important to me. On a personal level, I'm excited again to be in a new country and then understand a little bit more about some of the opportunities and challenges, not just here in Portugal, but also Spain and our neighbors, Gary and I, country-wise, but also across Europe, and continuing to support businesses and individuals. Um, and also hoping to continue to be inspired by people doing amazing work in this field also. And I think now we also just to wrap up this question, I think there is we're at a point where we've learned so much over the years of doing something that still, in a way, I wouldn't call it in its infancy, because social justice obviously is not nothing new, and social justice in the workplace is nothing new. But I think the way that we've the past 10 to 5 years, things have accelerated and we've learned so much. And I think we need to seize that, but also acknowledge that we are operating in a slightly different field now, because obviously the geopolitical situation we find ourselves in. So how can we gather strength and power from all our learns, but also be flexible to understand what different techniques do we have to use.
And I think that's the exciting part. And, the world has changed and continues to change. And this space in ED&I is broadening. And I definitely fight back with the narrative around the rollback to actually say, I think it's just a repositioning. And we're all having to find new ways of doing it. And we'll continue to do so. And the topic will continue to evolve, and it takes people like you to help make a change, and that's the reality. And I know from your previous work that you were doing in the UK and what you're going to do now, you will make an impact on it because of your why. And I talk about my why all the time, so we're literally the same person, Matt. I love it. And Matt, before we finish up today, how can people connect with you?
LinkedIn. So my name is, Matheus Carvalho. That's my full name, but please do look me up. Please do just send me a message, just say hi. I would love to connect, speak to other people who, whether you need support or whether you just want to connect because you're doing work in this field, or also if you want to have a conversation about movies, why not? That's my other tip. If you're working in any space, do have passions that allow you to connect with other sides of your being that are not necessarily always work related, and allow you to daydream or to disconnect or to connect with other parts of you. So, and that for me, those are the movies. So we can talk about movies as well.
I love that. Well, we'll put your link to your LinkedIn and to what you do in the movie space as well in the show notes so that people can get to it. Matheus, I first met you a few years ago. We both had a dream, which was I wanted to live in Spain, you wanted to live in Portugal. We talked about it as if it was a pipe dream. And if we can have a moment for ourselves to go, yay, we did it. We're now neighbours outside of the UK in Spain and Portugal. So hearing your conversation today and your story around the challenges of, and we've only just touched the surface, right? But it's great to see you having so much success in what you're doing, and I'm sure that people who've listened today will have understood some of the barriers that have been in place for you as someone who is a gay male, but also with your diagnosis around ADHD. And I think it's one thing that's becoming much more talked about, and the more that we talk about these things openly, whether that's sexuality or neurodiversity, it can only be a good thing. And I thank you for your time.
Congratulations on all your achievements as well, Gary. I appreciate it. I appreciate the time.
Wow, what a story. It was so wonderful to spend some more time with Matheus as we share many of the same experiences, but mostly to hear how he continues to prosper in his life and in his career. I hope you enjoyed this latest episode. Don't forget you can catch up on the other amazing stories in the series so far, and also you can like and subscribe so you can stay up to date with the many more stories that are set to come in the upcoming episodes. And also, if you are a business looking for support with supercharging your inclusion journey, my consultancy, Think Inclusion Consulting, is here to help. You can get in touch with me via LinkedIn or email at gary@thinkinclusionconsulting.com. See you next time.